Martin Steele, Donovan, and Lisa, the Whisper O'Reilly, weren't just names on the streets of Liverpool. They were legends of fear and power. From ruthless heroin dealers in shadowy alleyways to cold-blooded hitmen with digital weapons, their rise and fall reveal the dark transformation of a city gripped by crime. This is the story of how Liverpool's gangs evolved from desperate dealers to unstoppable syndicates, and why no one is truly safe anymore. In the early 1980s, Liverpool was a city struggling with economic decline and social unrest. The once bustling docks, which had been the lifeblood of the city for decades, were slowly losing their importance. Unemployment soared, and hope seemed to vanish from the narrow streets and cramped housing estates. Amid this desperation, a deadly new trade began to take hold. Heroin. It arrived quietly at first, smuggled in small shipments through the port, but it quickly spread like wildfire. Heroin was cheap, powerful, and addictive, and soon entire neighborhoods became trapped in its grasp. The first dealers were small-time hustlers, but as demand grew, so did the scale of the operation. A handful of men emerged from the chaos, ruthless and determined, who understood how to turn the drug into a fortune. They were clever, using the city's geography, the maze of alleyways, abandoned buildings and labyrinthine docks to their advantage. These dealers formed tight-knit groups controlling entire estates where they set up their drug dens. Their power was absolute, backed by a readiness to use violence against anyone who dared to challenge them. At this stage, the gangs were not the sophisticated organizations they would become, but they were feared all the same. The streets were ruled by those with the quickest guns and the sharpest minds. The dealers didn't just sell drugs. They created a system that preyed on addiction, breaking families apart and turning friends into enemies. Children as young as 10 were drawn into the cycle, some working as runners or lookouts, while others became addicts themselves. Heroin was more than a drug. It was a weapon. It destroyed lives and communities, creating an environment where crime flourished. Police forces were overwhelmed and ill-equipped to deal with this new kind of criminal empire. The drugs flowed steadily into the city, and the gang's grip tightened. By the end of the decade, Liverpool had become one of the most dangerous cities in Britain, where the heroin trade ruled not just the streets, but the very future of its people. The stage was set for a brutal and violent transformation, one that would shape the city for decades to come. As the heroin trade grew stronger in Liverpool during the 1980s, so did the competition between rival gangs. What had started as small groups controlling a few streets quickly escalated into widespread turf wars. Every gang wanted control over the most profitable neighborhoods, and the stakes were deadly high. These conflicts were not simple disagreements. They turned into violent battles that left the city's streets soaked in blood. The gangs fought fiercely to defend their territories and to expand their influence. Armed with pistols, knives, and sometimes homemade explosives, they attacked rivals without hesitation. Shootings happened in broad daylight, often in front of innocent bystanders. Bombs were placed under cars, and violent clashes broke out in pubs and on street corners. The violence wasn't limited to gang members. Civilians often found themselves caught in the crossfire, victims of a war they never wanted. The gangs used intimidation and fear as tools to keep control. Messages were sent in the form of brutal acts, heads left on doorsteps, warning shots fired into homes, and public beatings. This constant threat created an atmosphere of terror in many neighborhoods. Residents lived in fear, locking their doors and avoiding the streets after dark. Some families were forced to move away, unable to protect themselves from the relentless violence. At the same time, police efforts to stop the bloodshed were often too little, too late. Law enforcement struggled to gather enough evidence to make arrests, as witnesses were too afraid to come forward. Corruption and fear within the police force also made it difficult to dismantle the gangs. The criminals exploited these weaknesses, growing bolder and more aggressive. Despite the brutality, this period also saw a grim kind of order emerge. Gangs established strict rules within their own ranks, punishing betrayal and disloyalty harshly. Trust and loyalty became a matter of survival. The wars forged a generation of hardened criminals, many of whom would rise to even greater power in the years to come. The violence marked a turning point, shaping the gangs into organized, ruthless forces that would dominate Liverpool's underworld for decades. The city was becoming a battleground, and the war was far from over. By the late 1980s, Liverpool's gangs had evolved beyond simple street dealers and violent turf fights. As the stakes grew higher and the dangers increased, gangs began to rely on a new kind of muscle, the enforcers. These were young men recruited for one clear purpose: to protect the gang's interests through violence and intimidation. They were the hitmen, the feared soldiers in a war that few outsiders fully understood. These enforcers weren't just ordinary criminals, they were carefully chosen for their willingness to carry out brutal tasks without hesitation. Many were teenagers, drawn from broken homes or desperate situations, lured by the promise of power, money, and respect. They were trained in the streets, learning how to handle weapons, carry out attacks quickly, and disappear before the police arrived. Their loyalty was enforced through fear and the constant threat of death if they failed or betrayed their bosses. The role of the enforcer was dangerous and isolating. They lived in a world where trust was rare and betrayal deadly. Orders came from above, often without explanation, and disobedience meant punishment or death. These young men became numb to violence, carrying out killings and assaults with cold efficiency. Many believed that violence was the only language respected in their world. Despite their youth, these hitmen developed a reputation for precision and cruelty. They executed hits in crowded places, sending clear messages to rival gangs and anyone who dared to challenge their authority. Their actions were often designed to terrorize entire neighborhoods, solidifying the gang's control without the need for constant patrols or displays of force. The rise of the enforcers also marked a shift in gang dynamics. Leaders no longer needed to be present on the streets to maintain control. They could command from behind the scenes, using their hitmen as tools to enforce discipline and expand their influence. This allowed the gangs to grow bigger and more organized, laying the groundwork for the violent syndicates that would dominate Liverpool in the years to come. The enforcers were both the protectors and the destroyers of the gang world, necessary for survival, feared by all, and ultimately disposable. Their rise signaled a new darker chapter in Liverpool's criminal history, one defined by ruthless violence and unyielding loyalty. The 1990s brought a turning point in Liverpool's criminal underworld. After years of unchecked violence and growing public outrage, law enforcement launched a fierce crackdown on the heroin trade and the gangs that controlled it. Police raids became more frequent and coordinated, using new tactics and intelligence to target drug dens and arrest key figures. Many of the old kingpins, the powerful men who had ruled the streets throughout the 1980s, were arrested and imprisoned, leaving a sudden power vacuum in their wake. This shift sent shockwaves through the city's criminal networks. With the main players behind bars or dead, smaller, less experienced crews rushed to fill the gap. These new groups were often more reckless and unpredictable, hungry for power and eager to prove themselves. The established order fractured, sparking a wave of new violence as the younger generation fought to claim territory and respect. The streets that once had a grim, stable control now became battlegrounds once again, but this time the lines were less clear and alliances constantly shifted. The crackdown also exposed weaknesses in the old gang structures. The heavy reliance on heroin profits meant that when police disrupted supply chains, entire operations collapsed quickly. Gangs had not prepared for this level of pressure, and many struggled to maintain control. However, the chaos also forced criminal groups to become more adaptable. They began experimenting with different drugs and criminal activities to replace lost income, realizing they could no longer depend solely on heroin. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies started to improve their methods, learning from past failures. New technologies such as surveillance cameras and wiretaps gave the police an edge, allowing them to monitor suspects more effectively. However, the gangs adapted as well, becoming smarter in avoiding detection. They started using encrypted phones and secret meeting places, turning the city's underground into a game of cat and mouse. Though the heroin empire had been weakened, the gang's ability to survive and evolve ensured that Liverpool's criminal underworld remained dangerous. The 1990s became a decade of transition, where the old guard fell but a new, more fluid and unpredictable era of gang activity began. A sign that the city's fight against crime was far from over. As the heroin trade declined in the 1990s, Liverpool's gangs realized they needed new ways to make money. The old business of selling drugs alone wasn't enough to support their growing ambitions or violent lifestyles. This pushed them to diversify their criminal activities, branching out into a range of illegal enterprises that would change the face of the city's underworld forever. One of the first new ventures was extortion. Gang members demanded protection money from local businesses and residents, promising safety in exchange for regular payments. Those who refused often faced brutal consequences, arson, beatings, or worse. This created an atmosphere of fear where silence became the only option. Extortion proved to be a steady and reliable income source, spreading gang influence deeper into communities. Robbery and burglary also became more organized and professional. No longer simple smash-and-grab jobs. These crimes were planned with military precision. Teams of gang members would strike high-value targets, including cash-in-transit vehicles and wealthy homes, often using stolen vehicles and weapons. These operations required coordination and insider knowledge, showing how gangs had grown more sophisticated. Human trafficking emerged as a dark and disturbing side of this diversification. Vulnerable women and children were forced into prostitution or exploited for profit. The gangs controlled entire rings, moving victims between cities and countries, making detection difficult. This brutal trade added a terrifying new layer to the gang's power, showing their willingness to cross any line for money. Counterfeit goods and drug manufacturing also entered the mix. Fake designer clothing, electronics, and other goods flooded local markets, while some gangs experimented with producing synthetic drugs to replace heroin. These activities required different skills and connections, broadening the gang's reach beyond traditional street crime. This diversification made the gangs more resilient. Even when one source of income was disrupted by the police, others would keep flowing. It also blurred the lines between different criminal groups, as they sometimes worked together or competed in new areas. Liverpool's gangs were no longer just street dealers. They had transformed into multi-layered criminal organizations with vast networks. This change set the stage for the even more dangerous evolution to come, as they embraced technology and new forms of violence to maintain control over the city's underworld. As the new millennium dawned, Liverpool's gangs faced a rapidly changing world. The rise of digital technology opened up new opportunities and new threats. Criminal organizations that had once operated solely on the streets began to explore the possibilities of cyberspace. This shift marked a dramatic turning point in how gangs conducted their business, making them harder to track and more dangerous than ever. Encrypted phones became the first major tool in this new age of crime. These devices allowed gang members to communicate without fear of police surveillance, using codes and secret channels that were almost impossible to crack. Messages about drug shipments, hits, and territory disputes could be sent instantly and wiped clean with the push of a button. This technology gave gangs an unprecedented level of security and control, helping them stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Social media also played a surprising role. Gangs used platforms not just for communication, but for intimidation and recruitment. Photos flaunting weapons, money, and drugs spread quickly online, sending clear warnings to rivals and attracting young people desperate for belonging and power. This digital bravado helped gangs build fearsome reputations, without needing to be physically present in every neighborhood. The internet's dark corners, the so-called dark web, became marketplaces for illegal goods, from drugs to weapons. Liverpool gangs tapped into these networks, buying and selling anonymously across borders. This expanded their reach far beyond the city, linking them to international crime syndicates. With drug supply chains becoming global, the city's gangs found new ways to import and distribute narcotics more efficiently and covertly. Police forces tactics, sometimes even using military-style weapons and surveillance techniques. Unlike the enforcers of earlier decades, these hitmen were often part of tightly organized squads that planned hits down to the smallest detail. They used technology to track targets, communicate securely, and escape detection. GPS tracking, encrypted messaging, and surveillance cameras all played a role in their operations. This made them incredibly hard to catch, as every move was calculated to avoid police intervention. The violence was brutal and swift. Assassinations took place in public spaces, often during broad daylight, sending shockwaves through communities. These attacks weren't random. They were carefully chosen to send a clear message to rival gangs and anyone who might consider crossing them. Innocent bystanders sometimes became unintended victims, increasing the sense of fear that gripped entire neighborhoods. Police investigations during this time began to uncover chilling case files that revealed the extent of this new violence. Forensic teams used ballistic evidence and digital tracking to piece together complex crime scenes. In some cases, surveillance footage caught moments that exposed gang hitmen's methods, leading to high-profile arrests. These breakthroughs demonstrated the growing sophistication of law enforcement, but also highlighted how deeply embedded these criminals were in the city. This era also saw the rise of gang alliances across regions and even countries. Liverpool's hitmen didn't just work for local gangs. They sometimes took contracts from criminal organizations far beyond the city, linking Liverpool's underworld to a wider network of violence. The emergence of these highly trained killers marked a chilling evolution in Liverpool's gang culture. They were no longer just enforcers. They were professional assassins with global connections. Their deadly efficiency and cold calculation ensured that Liverpool's streets remained some of the most dangerous in the country, a grim testament to the city's continuing battle with crime. Behind the violent scenes of Liverpool's gang wars, women and families played complex and often overlooked roles. While the gangs were mostly controlled by men, women were deeply involved in the life and survival of these criminal networks. Some women acted as messengers or smugglers, moving drugs and information quietly through neighborhoods. Others became the caretakers of gang members, providing emotional support or hiding them from the police. These roles, though less visible, were crucial to the gang's operations. At the same time, women often bore the heaviest burdens of gang violence. Many were victims of abuse, caught in cycles of fear and control. Some found themselves forced into dangerous situations, including exploitation in human trafficking rings run by gangs. Their stories reveal a hidden side of the criminal world, one of pain, resilience, and survival. Families were deeply affected by the gang culture too. In many cases, involvement in crime became a family affair, passed down through generations. Children grew up in environments where violence and illegal activity were normal parts of life. Some were drawn into the gangs from a young age, whether as runners, lookouts, or future fighters. Others struggled to escape, haunted by the trauma and danger that surrounded them. Survivor accounts provide a powerful glimpse into this world. Many speak of loss, friends and relatives killed or imprisoned, and the difficult choices they faced. Some found ways out, seeking education, work, or relocation to break the cycle. Others remained trapped, either by circumstance or loyalty to their families and communities. The influence of family ties also complicated law enforcement efforts. Loyalty to relatives often meant silence, protecting loved ones at all costs. This made it harder for police to gather evidence and dismantle the gangs. Yet, the strength of these bonds also offered hope. Community programs focused on family support and rehabilitation began to show that change was possible. This chapter reveals the human cost behind the headlines, the personal struggles and quiet bravery of those living in Liverpool's gang-ridden neighborhoods. It's a reminder that beyond the violence, there are lives forever shaped by the gang's shadow. As Liverpool's gangs grew more dangerous and sophisticated, the city began to fight back with new determination. Community leaders, law enforcement, and local organizations joined forces to confront the escalating violence and criminal control. This chapter reveals the many surprising and sometimes successful efforts made to reclaim neighborhoods and restore safety. One key strategy was the introduction of community programs aimed at preventing young people from joining gangs. These initiatives offered education, job training, and mentorship, providing alternatives to the life of crime. Schools and youth centers became safe havens where troubled teens could find support and guidance. Although results were slow to show, these programs planted seeds of hope in neighborhoods long plagued by fear. On the law enforcement side, police forces adopted advanced surveillance technology, including CCTV cameras placed strategically throughout the city. These cameras helped monitor hotspots and deter violent acts. Undercover operations became more common, with officers infiltrating gangs to gather intelligence. Specialized units focused solely on gang-related crime were created, improving coordination and response times. Partnerships between police and communities also improved trust, encouraging witnesses to come forward with information. Witness protection programs were strengthened to ensure the safety of those brave enough to testify. These changes marked a shift away from the no-snitching culture that had long protected criminals. Despite these efforts, challenges remained. Gang violence still flared unpredictably, and some areas remained under the control of criminal groups. Corruption and intimidation sometimes undermined police work, while poverty and lack of opportunity continued to feed the cycle of crime. However, the combined efforts began to chip away at the gang's influence, disrupting drug supply chains and arresting key figures. Innovative technology also played a role in law enforcement's success. Digital forensics helped crack encrypted communications, and data analysis identified patterns linking crimes to specific groups. This high-tech approach marked a new phase in the fight against organized crime. Liverpool's battle with gangs became a test of resilience and collaboration. While the city still faced serious threats, these combined efforts brought new hope that the grip of violence and fear could one day be broken. The struggle was far from over, but Liverpool was no longer standing still. Today, Liverpool's gangs are unlike anything seen in previous decades. They have transformed into hyper-violent, tech-savvy syndicates, with connections that stretch far beyond the city's limits. These criminal organizations have become highly organized networks that combine traditional street-level violence with advanced digital tools, making them a formidable force in the UK's underworld and beyond. The gangs operate with a level of sophistication that rivals corporate businesses. They use encrypted communication apps, digital money transfers, and online marketplaces to manage drug sales, weapons trafficking, and other illegal enterprises. Their operations span multiple cities and even countries, linking Liverpool's criminal world with international crime syndicates. This global reach allows them to move drugs and weapons quickly, evade law enforcement, and expand their influence. Violence remains a key part of their control strategy. Modern hitmen use high-powered firearms, surveillance technology, and tactical planning to carry out assassinations with chilling efficiency. These killings are designed not only to eliminate rivals, but also to intimidate entire communities. The threat of brutal retaliation keeps many silent, allowing gangs to operate with relative impunity. Yet despite their power, cracks have begun to show within these syndicates. Law enforcement agencies are adapting, employing cybercrime experts and international cooperation to dismantle networks piece by piece. High-profile arrests have disrupted operations, and digital evidence has become a powerful tool against criminals who once believed they were untouchable. An unexpected twist in this evolving landscape is the emergence of uneasy alliances between former rivals. Facing increased police pressure and competition from outside groups, some gangs have chosen cooperation over conflict to protect their interests. These alliances blur traditional boundaries and create new challenges for those trying to combat organized crime. As Liverpool looks to the future, the battle between gangs and the city's defenders continues. Will these syndicates continue to evolve and expand? Or will a combination of community efforts, law enforcement innovation, and changing social conditions finally break their hold? The answer remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: Liverpool's fight against organized